what I think is going to happen in 2025, there's also three major things, according to freelance, creator-owned, and independent comics. With freelance comics, I do anticipate a shrinking of the market where there'll be fewer projects, and the projects that do happen will have lower page rates. And the reason I say this is because a lot of publishing is luxury kind of publishing. Someone decides whether they're an independent publisher, whether they're part of a conglomerate, that they have the money to spend on publishing. Because I anticipate prices rising in the US in the short term, a lot of that, and prices rising in general, I'm assuming there's going to be less money to play with to do publishing projects, which means there's going to be less need for freelancers. There's also going to be the AI issue that I talked about in the 2024 segment, and the idea that if there's fewer projects, there's going to be more competition for each project, which is going to drive the price per page down as people scramble to try to get any work that they can. The solution there, I think, is to try to take advantage of the geographic freedom that comic books have. You can make comics for anyone in any country. So if the market starts to shrink in the US, I would look at specific countries and areas that are trying to expand their comic book publishing and see if you can get a foothold there with your portfolio. I'm thinking specifically about the Middle East with the Sandstorm Project in North Africa. There's expansions of comic book production from companies like Webtoon. So if you're willing to actually explore different markets, you may be able to avoid the contraction that I'm anticipating is going to be in the next couple of years in the freelance market. For creator-owned, this is actually something that I've been seeing for the past couple years, and this is specifically related to conventions and other kind of in-person direct-to-consumer sales efforts, where traditional places where you could actually get your comic in front of people, and I'm specifically talking about conventions run by organizations like Read Pop, they are either cutting back on or eliminating almost completely their openness to having any kind of Western comic being in Artist Alley, giving them panels, or using other mechanisms to get the word out about the books, because they're focused primarily on webtoons, manga, Chinese comics. If your comic is of that style or coming from those companies, then you should be fine. But if you're trying to go the creator-owned route with like an IDW, a Dark Horse, or things like that, I've seen contractions in that market, and I anticipate that is going to continue, especially after Webtoon went public this year. So my suggested solution there is to look for these smaller shows, the regional shows, the local shows, or the shows specific to your genre. We've talked about this several times. If you have a horror comic, you don't necessarily have to go to a comic book convention. You can go to a horror convention and maybe have more luck in terms of getting exposure for your book. For independent comics, it's also related to the perceived economic downturn and the possible tariffs and inflation that may come in 2025. I think that if there's tariffs and those prices are being passed on to consumers, the price of, especially in single issues in the direct market, may rise so high that you are choking off the last remnants of demand in that particular distribution channel. I also think, and this is not what I think, this is something that I stole from someone who was smarter than me in the printing and distribution of comics, who said a lot of the paper that comics are being printed on also comes from Asia, comes from Canada. And if there's a tariff or any kind of inflation placed on that paper, there's going to be a shortage of paper to print comics. So even if most of your distribution is crowdfunding or most of your distribution is direct to consumer, and you're not really concerned about the rising prices in the direct market, you may be faced with a situation where the cost of paper is so high that even though you have a much better markup in your backer rewards tiers for crowdfunding, you still can't, either you can't get the book printed or you can't get the book printed at a decent rate, or something else may disrupt your distribution setup. What I'm suggesting here is kind of getting in front of the potential problem, which means if you're working with printers now, or if you're talking to printers now, ask them what kind of inventory they're expecting to have in 2025, especially if you know you're planning a crowdfunding campaign in March or in June or July. Ask them if you know the weight that you want in terms of the paper stock, the interior stock, and the cover stock. Ask them if they have that available or they anticipate having that available. And if the price is going to increase, how much is it going to increase? Because if you have that information, you can build that into your P&L and then maybe cut costs in other areas to cover printing, or look for alternative printers, or at least understand what that situation is going to be so it doesn't blindside you when you've already had your successful crowdfunding campaign, you're ready to print the book, and then you realize there's no paper.